Hi. I've just read a report which is frankly pretty disturbing, um, and to me kind of epitomizes what I dislike about the trend that many of our universities seem to be going in. So I'll just read out this report, BBC report. It's not very long, so bear with me. The report's by Sean Coughlin. Um, Sheffield students paid to tackle racist language on campus. Paid to tackle language on campus. We hear this. A university is to hire 20 of its own students to challenge language on campus that could be seen as racist. Seen as racist. That's a very important point. The University of Sheffield is to pay students to tackle so-called microaggressions, which it describes as subtle but offensive comments. They will be trained to lead healthy conversations about preventing racism on campus and in student accommodation. Vice Chancellor Cohen Lambert said the initiative wanted to change the way people think about racism. Students will be paid £9.34 per hour as race equality champions, working between 2 and 9 hours per week to tackle microaggressions in the university. These are described as comments or actions which might be unintentional, but which can cause offence to a minority group. It gives examples of what is meant by microaggression, such as stop making everything a race issue. Why are you searching for things to be offended about? Where are you really from? I don't want to hear about your holiday to South Africa. It's nowhere near where I'm from. Being compared to black celebrities that I look nothing like. Right, let's just look, before I continue, let's just look at those a little bit. Um, where are you really from? Yeah, I can see that being a little bit offensive because it kind of insinuates that someone isn't British. That could be a little bit offensive. I can get that. I don't want to hear about your holiday to South Africa. It's nowhere near where I'm from. Well, that just sounds like rudeness. I don't really see how that's racist. Bit rude, but racist. They compared to black celebrities that look nothing like. Well, what if a white student was compared to a white celebrity? Would that be racist? Again, it's a bit ignorant and it's a bit flippant, but racist? I don't know. Now stop making everything a race issue, and why are you searching for things to be offended about? How they can be construed as racist in themselves? Surely that's just a backlash against political correctness and against the woke culture. Why are you looking for things to be offended about? Is a rebuke. You may not agree with that rebuke, but it's simply a rebuke to what we see going on here. Anyway, I'll continue the report, reading the report. Rather than being about controlling people's speech, the university says it is opening up a conversation. It says the equality roles are being created in response to demand from students, training them how to help their peers understand racism and its impact. Sounds like nauseating condescension to me. We think it's important to be open and honest about racism, said Professor Lambert. A report last autumn from the Equality and Human Rights Commission warned that racism was a common occurrence for some students, with incidents of name-calling, physical attacks, and racist material on campus. The Equality Watchdog said that the universities did not want to face up to the scale of the problem because of fears it could harm their reputations. Right, there's a few things to say with this, a lot of things to say actually. Number one, it's a particular institution in question, the University of Sheffield. Now, the report ended up there saying there's been reports of physical attacks. That's ironic because the University of Sheffield was one of the institutions last year. There were others, but it was one of them in which there were reports of mainland Chinese students harassing their Hong Kong peers over the situation in Hong Kong. Now, I know this to be true because I actually done an interview via Skype with a student who I'll keep anonymous um, over that precise issue because as part of my course I had to do a kind of template interview. I mean, I was treated completely that it was an actual interview, but it was for part of my assignment to get feedback from the British College of Journalism because this is something that I'm getting into. Anyway, as part of that, I interviewed him. I reached out to the University of Sheffield. They never got back to me. Um, I looked into the University of Sheffield, though, as part of my research, and not surprisingly, they have a lot of investment from China. Now, the reason I mention that is because it seems they're focusing on this microaggression issue, but they've done nothing about what was actual abuse. I mean, Hong Kong students had reported threats, they'd reported cyberbullying, things that were a lot more serious than some of the examples cited there. So I really see a bizarre Orwellian situation here where universities are getting authoritarian, and whatever way they gloss it over, trying to control speech is authoritarian, um, and yet they're actually ignoring more serious issues. Now, I totally support bullying being tackled. In fact, I would strongly advocate that be tackled. No one should be made to feel unsafe or unwelcome. But the example cited, that's what I find particularly disturbing. I also find the pay incentive disturbing because it can create a situation whereby if people have a pay incentive, if these students, I mean, how are they going to be vetted? How are they going to be picked out to be these officers? Because they could very easily, I can see that being ripe for abuse. Someone may just want to make a bit of extra cash. So they'll just try to find other students to lecture. I mean, what sort of context would it even take? Like, oh, by the way, you've just committed a microaggression. I want to bring you into this little room where I can give you a lecture about your language. I don't even know how the report doesn't specify how they would do that. And it just, it's, it's obviously going to be ripe for abuse where there's a financial incentive involved. Um, if universities have been criticised by the Equality and Race Commission, okay, they need to act on it. But I really think this is the wrong way to go about it. I think it should just be common sense. Students should have an avenue to complain if they feel they have suffered racial abuse, and the students responsible should be held to account for that. But for God's sake, asking where someone is from is not racial abuse. I think there's another issue that needs to be looked at here, which is namely some students being too sensitive. Because if they can't handle so called microaggressions, how the hell are they going to handle the real world? I mean, these are people who are training to be doctors, teachers, business people, professionals. So that doesn't bode well for the future if they're going to be so super sensitive over what are pretty innocent questions. Some of those things, okay, would be quite annoying. Well, you know what? Just tell the person, well, just stand up for yourselves. I just think this is a worrying trend. And the university can gloss it over whatever way they like. But they say it's not about controlling speech. But how else can you describe that? I mean, how is this going to be done? If a student's committing a so-called microaggression, are they going to be brought into a room? How's that going to work? It just sounds rife for abuse. Now, don't get me wrong, where there are clear examples of racism, say for example you have some student who use an obvious racial slur to minority students, or any student for that matter, I hope this is universally applied, um, then the individuals responsible should be held to account. I'm suspicious of this because, like I say, the University of Sheffield did not act. This is the feedback I got from those Hong Kong students, did not act on very clear allegations and examples that were made in that regard, and they certainly didn't respond to my request. I wanted to interview them. I wanted to get their perspective. I wanted to be fair. I wanted to hear their perspective. I gave them a week to respond, and they didn't. So either they couldn't be bothered, or they just don't want to upset China in that case. In other words, they're not getting their priorities right. Um, but this really is something that it's not just Sheffield. I think similar things can be seen all around the country. This whole concept of microaggressions is bullshit, to put it bluntly. If someone says something you find offensive, you have two choices. You either ignore it or you just tell them you disagree. But if you're going to make it such an issue that you're treating that on par with racial abuse, or you have to consider how are you going to handle the world. If you're a sensitive person and you know you're sensitive, that's something you need to work on. Okay, you cannot go through life constantly analyzing what people say. Yeah, there's ignorant people, and look, I've had it. I'm from Northern Ireland. I get annoyed when people kind of act like I've just come over from Ireland. I'm Northern Irish and I'm British, and that's something I find quite annoying. But I am not going to complain about it in the sense that I am not going to try and get someone fired for saying something like that. I'll just tell them. I really think the whole concept of microaggressions, I think it's dangerous to have a combination of extreme sensitivity and language control. And that's what this is. It's a slippery, slippery slope because, what's to stop this then transcending into trying to control people's political views? Where do you draw the line? That's my concern. And these universities are just kind of, they're almost like little microstates that are doing what they want. But these little microstates are actually pretty totalitarian in some ways, under the guise of tolerance. Because what we're seeing is a generation, and this is not referring to everyone, okay? I'm not generalizing, but we are seeing too many younger millennials, if I could put it that way. I'm a millennial, but I guess now I'm an older millennial. Younger millennials who are really being sucked up into this culture. I think it was The Spectator, can't remember now, but there was an article which basically was talking about how our universities are basically becoming left-wing madrasas. Now that might sound like hyperbole, but when you consider things like this, when you consider that students are actually being paid basically to monitor language, that's Orwellian. It really is. Where there are clear examples of bullying, what should happen is the people who feel that they're being bullied or receiving racial harassment should, they should have an avenue to report that, and the people responsible should be held to account. And in the worst scenarios, they should be threatened with suspension for sure. I'm all for tackling bullying. I would never ever downplay bullying. Bullying is a horrible thing. I was bullied. It's a horrible thing. That's not what I'm talking about. But I do not consider so-called microaggressions to be bullying, particularly when, as the university itself acknowledges, very often it's well intentioned. So what are you going to do? You're going to shame students for asking where people are from? I mean, if I meet someone at a party, to me that's just one avenue of conversation. Oh, what's your name? What do you like to do? Where are you from? Are we now saying that asking someone where they're from is racist? So if I ask a black person where they're from, that's going to be construed as racist. I could meet a black Londoner. I may just want to know which borough they're from, just out of interest. It's this kind of tendency to want to be offended that is so dangerous because we're now seeing it getting into a form of control. So this really needs to be scrutinized heavily. And I think students who are, if you're watching this video, well, you've probably been already triggered. Thank God I'm no longer at university because honestly, this sort of thing is just, I think it's getting out of control. Common sense has went out of the window. It seems to me that actual harassment and bullying is not being tackled. Microaggressions are the focus. Really makes no sense.